Empire, War, and Colonial Rebellion. Chapters 15 and 16. The essential question is, why were there so many wars in the mid-18th century? First of all, let's look at the 18th century European empires and what they were really shooting for, which was mercantilism. Empires existed primarily to enrich trade. So if empires want to enrich trade, the system was mercantilism. And so mercantilism existed, which promoted the establishment of colonies. Colonies could give people the natural resources they needed. So the theory contends that colonies are needed to keep trade expanding. Not only do you get natural resources, you also get ports. You get maybe the conquering of people, and power comes with that. And if you don't conquer the people, you trade with them. So it's making trade deals. And mercantilism also suggests that the government needs to support trade because it is good for the economy. The Spanish colonial system controlled South America. Spain is going to be the best of the early colonial empires. In the 16th and 17th century, the Casa de Contratación from Seville controlled trade with the New World. Casa means house and contract for Contratación. So basically you made a contract with the House of Trade, if you want to call it that, in Seville. The picture on the left is the House of Trade in Seville. And their countries or businesses or people from Spain could create their own little system in South America. And so they are going to allow you to trade or not to trade in the New World. The new Bourbon rulers of Spain, after the War of the Spanish Succession, opened up more varied trade in the 18th century. So in the 18th century, this system is going to change from the monopoly that Casa de Contratación had to being a little bit more varied. And Bourbon rulers, you also had Bourbons in France, and the Bourbons take over after the War of the Spanish Succession, in which no leader came from the line of the ruling kings in Spain. You're going to have colonial rivalry. At the heart of the 18th century colonial rivalry lie the West Indies. And colonial rivalry refers to the fact that almost every country in Europe wanted colonies. So they're going to fight over them. Gold, spices, sugar, tobacco, and other products were a big incentive for imperialism. Those things are making countries rich. And you could get these are warm weather, for the most part, warm weather products. And you could get them, by going to the New World. The plantation system existed so that you could easily make a whole bunch of money by producing one crop, and you use slave labor in order to do that, and it required cheap labor. So you're either paying people very little to do a lot of work, or you're buying slaves, and obviously once you purchase them, then they are yours. Slavery and impressment of natives were used to meet the demand for labor. We have had impressment of sailors for a long time, where one country would take over a ship and force their sailors to work for them. That's called impressment. But now impressment of natives. So the native people, when they got to the New World, they forced the Indians, as we would call them, but the native people to work for them. The English and French led the way in trading slaves. They were the biggest of the money makers in slaves. The Dutch were also slave traders, but they did more of the shipping. Remember, that's what the Dutch are known for. So they're going to do a lot of the shipping, and a lot of times it was a subletting thing. the English might hire the Dutch to run the ships, getting the slaves from Africa to the New World. France and Britain don't like each other anyway, but the French and British rivalry is going to intensify because of the colonial aggression. Several wars were fought in the mid-18th century, and this colonial rivalry is going to be at the heart of them. Number one was the War of Jenkins' Ear, beginning in 1739 over trade interference in the New World. And this is a great story. I'll try to make it brief. But the War of Jenkins' Ear started when a Captain Jenkins of England, his ship came into contact with a French ship, and they fought. The French ship boarded the English ship, and they began to try to take over the British ship and impress the sailors. Jenkins gets out with his sword and is fighting. You can imagine a duel out on the deck with the captains, and one of the Frenchmen draws his sword and cuts off Jenkins' ear. Well, the British end up going on and winning this. Jenkins finds his ear laying on the deck. He puts it in a bottle of whiskey to preserve it and brings it back to England. Now, back at that time, they probably weren't very much even thinking about trying to reattach the ear or anything. Jenkins just wanted apparently as a souvenir. Well, anyway, they get out on the floor of Parliament. They bring in Jenkins as a witness. And the question is, should the British go to war over the colonial rivalry with the French? And the general mood is no. But Jenkins is one of the people called as a witness. And he gets in front of Parliament. He pulls out his bottle of whiskey with the ear in it, and he slams it down up on the podium, and he says, "You all talk about, not wanting to go to war with the French. Well, it's a matter of English pride and English power." He said, "I love my country. I gave my ear for my country." And he takes the bottle of whiskey with the ear in and, holds it up in the air and again slams it down. And anyway, apparently that had a pretty good impression on Parliament because they are going to decide to go to war with France. According to the Treaty of Utrecht, after the War of the Spanish Succession, this had allowed the British two rights. They had an asiento to furnish slaves to the Spanish. So the asiento was an agreement, a permission to sell slaves to the Spanish colonies. They also had the right to send one ship a year to the trading fair at Portobello. The trading fair at Portobello was rich with all of those tropical products, and countries from around the world were able to go there. But the Spanish controlled it. It's their territory. And while they didn't mind making a little money and charging these guys more than they did, their own people, they only limited how much you could buy. And so the British had one ship, and obviously they got the biggest ship that they could find so they could come and buy goods. These rights allowed smugglers potential inroads into the Spanish markets. And what is going to happen is this is the time of the pirates of the Caribbean, if you will. And you're going to have all kinds of unsavory characters now that are going to be pirates for French, English, Dutch, Spanish. You're going to get all kinds of them. The English seem to have been the best pirates, at least in the beginning. Well, with those wars going on, there was more than just the War of Jenkins' Ear. There were a number of wars fought over the trading rights there. We get to the War of the Austrian Succession. In 1740, Frederick II of Prussia challenged the Pragmatic Sanction by invading Silesia. You might remember the Pragmatic Sanction. That is the agreement that all Austrian lands were forever indivisible and run by the Habsburgs. And you might remember Silesia. Silesia is the natural resource-rich territory that Prussia gained in a war. Maria Theresa could have lost her empire there. because had the Austrians been beaten by the Prussians badly, the empire might have dissolved. But she preserved it by granting Hungary local autonomy. The Hungarians were trying to break away, and she did what I think was smart. She was an enlightened leader at the time, is she gives the Hungarians local autonomy. In other words, you control your local affairs. You're still part of the empire, but you can take care of all of your local laws. And she won support from her subjects by granting new freedom to the nobles. So that's the other thing she had to do. She had to satisfy the nobles, who are the main supporters, financially at least, of the king. And even though the common people probably loved the king more than anybody, the nobles were very important. And so she got her nobles to agree to keep the empire as it was with her as the queen by giving them more freedoms. So Silesia was lost. The Prussians did win Silesia, took it away from Austria, but the empire did remain. France aided Prussia. Remember, they're trying to do whatever they can to keep Germany divided. Great Britain entered the war on Austria's side to protect the Low Countries from French conquest. So see, everybody's got an angle at this time. That's one reason that there were so many wars. The British just don't want the Low Countries, Netherlands, what is going to be Luxembourg and Belgium, Denmark. They don't want them to fall under French conquest. And then we have something called the Diplomatic Revolution, which took place. Diplomacy, of course, is negotiating between countries. And a change of alliances took place. In 1756, Prussia and Great Britain signed the Convention of Westminster. So Prussia is going to join the British. France and Austria signed a similar pact. So France and Austria are going to be together. And of course, see what's going on here. Prussia and Austria both want to be Germany and both don't like each other. Britain and France have always hated each other, 100 Years' War, Britain and France. Prince Countess of Austria had hoped for an alliance which would help him dismember Prussia. So the Prince of Austria, he wants France to help him get Prussia back. What takes place is the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763. They weren't very creative on their war titles a lot of times back then, 100 Years' War, 30 Years' War, 7 Years' War. France and Britain fought each other in the colonies. In America, we call it the French and Indian War, and George Washington actually fought for the British during this. Actually, many American generals fought for the British because they were British citizens. Frederick invaded Saxony, which today is part of Germany, and an alliance formed against Prussia. Prussia, the military country, military society, people are going to begin to dislike them. Britain, however, aided Prussia, and the alliance collapsed when Empress Elizabeth died in Russia. Should be Russia, not Russian on the slide there. But Russia being part of that alliance was very important because they're on the east side of Prussia. But when Empress dies, then Russia gets out. And they made a quick separate peace. That is going to happen again, World War I. 1763, we have the Treaty of Paris. William Pitt, the Elder, wanted all of North America east of the Mississippi for Great Britain. And if you look at the map over there, you can see how it was divided. The treaty gave him most of what he wanted. This set the stage then for the American Revolution. One of America's complaints is going to be that they want to go west of the Mississippi. American colonists could not go west of the Mississippi at this time because it didn't belong to Britain. George III tried to increase the power of the king. He's a believer in the divine rights. He formed the King's Friends, kind of like a political party or a group. High taxes and other restrictive laws were passed, which hurt the colonies. Okay, now we're getting into the tea tax and the tax on Stamp Act, and we're getting all of those things, which are going to be part of the reason the United States rebels. We're also going to get the no taxation without representation. So the British colonists fought for freedom, and America won its independence from Britain. And after losing the colonies, there was a movement for parliamentary reform. And King George III does not have a good place in British history. He's considered to be the guy that lost the empire. And after losing the colonies, Britain does see that they need to do something with Parliament because there were a whole bunch of mistakes made. There's no way the American colonies should have been able to get freedom from the most powerful country on earth. Although few wanted to go as far as the Americans had in asking for broad appeal from the common man. And that is going to be an American thing. You can see why they wanted it. They wanted to actually allow more people to vote. I have on the next slide here, please do your summary. For that, remember, look back at the essential question. And then I have a first paragraph I'd like you to write, point of view. If you read page 571, and then write a first paragraph on this, addressing this question. How does Frederick appeal to the patriotism of his officers, and what are his expectations? Show and explain the point of view, the bias that Frederick had. So what kind of bias did he have? Show his point of view. Remember, that is part of writing our database questions.